Welcome back, video number 2. You can see in the background, that was the blue car I was going to do up. Now, we've had a couple of little things happen, and I'll flip the camera around. Hey presto, this popped up. So, I've purchased this. It's a 1990, obviously touring wagon with the raised roof, multi-point fuel injection, and apparently it's got a stuffed auto. So, we are now going to just flip things around a bit from what I was going to do originally, and we're going to change this from an auto to a manual and see if we can't get her on the road. The main reason I'm doing this video is if you're considering just doing an auto to manual conversion, I'm going to basically video and document what's involved in doing that. I'm not going to go through each little step by step, but as an overview, I'm just going to take note of two main things. One, how long it actually takes to do, and two, what it actually does end up costing at the end of the day, to see whether it's viable for anyone out there who's thinking of doing the same thing. So this thing I've picked up for $700, and it's relatively rust free. There's just a little bit, no massive surprise, at the bottom of the windscreen, and that's basically the worst of it. Both sides are a bit like this, so I won't bother detailing it too much, but A-pillars aren't pretty good. So the shell, once again, is quite good on this. Now, part of the purchase deal was the guy actually had all or most of the gear to do the conversion. So I paid $700 for it, which included all this stuff and some other stuff that's sitting out the back already. So we've got gearbox, we've got, should have enough stuff to do the clutch. Obviously we've got the tail shaft being a different length, pedal box there for obviously under the dashboard, and some of the trim bits and pieces. He also has the instrument cluster is also floating around here somewhere as well. So in theory we should have most of the stuff. Obviously I've got a whole bunch of stuff out the back if I need any extras, but the main thing I wanted to do was detail how long it actually takes to do and what extra dollars are involved in actually getting it on the road once I actually do the conversion too. So the gearbox he supplied, being an automatic 1990, this actually has a 3.9 rear diff ratio. He's given me a 3.7 diff, and this is a 3.7 gearbox. Obviously, like most on the southeast Queensland in Australia coastline, she's definitely been on the beach, sand all over it. But what I'm actually hoping to do is, rather than use this gearbox and the diff he supplied and just run around in 3.7s, this is going to be pretty much an off-road vehicle, so I want to get 3.9 gearbox and diff in it. So I'll see what I can dig out of my own shed and run 3.9s, which are obviously the lower ratios than the 3.7s. So yeah, so be an interesting little project just to see how long things actually take. As I say, she's still full on auto for now. We haven't actually even tried it. We know the engine runs, it's running sweet as. So yeah, we'll document it and see how many hours and how many dollars we have to put into it to get it going. Alright, stay tuned. Okay, so here we are. One full day I've spent, well, when I say one full day, probably 6.5 hours or thereabouts. So I've got the automatic gearbox obviously fully out, and I've just started prepping the manual. That's the old auto, one of two there. This is the manual gearbox I'm going to put in it, so I'll give this a bit of a clean up and a degrease this morning before she goes in. And as far as the interior goes, I've probably won't wait for it. I've done the pedal box swap, so a little bit tricky, but if you're into playing with cars, it's not the worst thing in the world. You just have to drop out a bit of stuff underneath there, the ECU, and you do have to take out the steering column. So that's all been swapped out completely, and I've got rid of the whole automatic transmission stuff, and I've just got the manual linkages sitting in there. These are I'll have to bypass the auto there as well, but so far so good. That's the main thing. So today's goal is to get the manual gearbox into the car. The linkages, I'll just have to, most of the linkages are worn out. I'll just see if most of the gearbox linkages, turn around, be easier. Down here, as you can see. So I'll just have to, I've got a couple of around here that might do for now. So yeah, cost wise, still $700 for the purchase, obviously. I did mention too, I did hire a trailer to get it home, so that was $105 and probably about $30 in fuel. So we're about $835 invested so far. So we'll see how today goes. Not quite the colour you see every day. Righto, so after doing the whole gearbox swap to manual, she was running all normal. And then I decided to Karcher wash the engine bay, and in doing so, obviously I stuffed something up that it didn't like very much, and it hasn't started for the last 3 days. It would turn over, but it wouldn't start. Now day 4. This is the first time on day 4 that she's actually started. I was just about to tow it into the shed, and I thought I'll give her one last go. So goodness gracious me, whatever I wet took 4 days to dry out. Okay, welcome back. This is the conclusion. Is it worth it? Is it worth doing an automatic to manual gearbox swap? Is it worth the hassle? Is it worth the time? Is it worth all the little tricks that you have to do along the way? Well, she's in. She's all running as though she were a manual, other than the dash. I haven't changed the dashboard instrument cluster over. That's just not something I'm worried about doing. So the main thing was to get it all in there and get it all functioning. So from my point of view, was it worth it? And the answer for me is yes. To find a car in such good condition overall that, although it will be an off-roader, really just has rust at the base of the windscreens and the usual trolley dings and a bit of an untidy interior, but generally quite good paint, it was definitely worth it. Okay, so I thought I'd interrupt my own video with a little update on costing so I can keep it accurate for the video and reference purposes. So with the car, trailer and fuel, we're in $835. Now I've really only used a bit of degreaser and paint and a couple of little extras around here, so realistically that's probably only $20 worth of little bits and pieces. So we're in about $850, $855 with the car and the conversion. There were a couple of other things I did along the way that got the car up to roadworthy spec as well. So I have got 2 new tyres put on rims, and also I did do the rear trailing arm bushes as well. So obviously that's not part of anything to do with the conversion, but it did, you know, bump the costing up to about $1,040 or thereabouts. So just want to keep the costing accurate so you guys know where we're at. It's taken about 25 hours keeping track of the time. Now that would seem quite good for some and quite long for others, no doubt. Investing that time for me worked out about right. There was a lot of little tricky things along the way, and there was a lot of little things that went in quite easily. For someone who doesn't have a yard full of spare parts and other bits and pieces to use and nick, I don't actually think it would be worth it. Unless you have a good mechanical knowledge and potentially a good donor car. And I'll give you a couple of reasons where I got hung up on stuff where luckily my parts helped me out. One of the first ones being, this is a little hanger that hangs off the back of the manual gearbox that your exhaust bolts onto. Both of these are off a manual car. This one's bent, should be straight. But when I went to fit one, one's actually a square pattern, one's actually rectangular. So I had to hunt through the collection to find one that was correct. One of the second other little things is, because this is a fuel injected model, it obviously has the O2 sensor down in the Y pipe of the exhaust. So the exhaust bracket was broken off the one that's on the car. Now obviously these do not have an O2 sensor, which would normally be located somewhere in about here. So what I did was I literally just angle grinded the little extension for the bracket off this Y pipe and welded it onto the new one. So again, if you didn't have access to welding facilities, that'd be a trip down to the exhaust shop, and no doubt, you know, could set you back a little bit. What else was there? Oh, the reverse light. Obviously with an automatic gearbox, all the wiring for the reverse lights are on your T-bar auto in the center console of the car, yet obviously with a manual gearbox it actually comes from a switch within the gearbox. So I basically had to, there's a couple obviously of plugs not being used, but I basically had to identify which two wires came out of the gearbox for the reverse plug switch, and I've literally run a little, see it in there, little green wire, and I tracked that through to the kick panel. You could track it right through to the center console, but I was able to track it through behind this right hand kick panel down here, and yeah, cut the wires there and join them in. So now when you put it in reverse, the reverse lights do actually come on, which is a bonus. All the center console went fine. It's a bit battered and torn, and there's a few little slight oddities, like even that little bit of a gap between the gear lever boot and the little tray there. Obviously wouldn't normally see that, I'm sure, in the manual. I haven't bothered looking to see why, but it all fits and bolts up. I did do linkages in the gear lever, so that's first gear, which for an L series, that's actually pretty good. As we know, that's all pretty much inside the gearbox itself. So I did have to do the gearbox bushes as well. So a lot of these little things can add up. The other thing was the tail shaft he supplied me, although it was the correct length, the little input shaft into the gearbox was quite rusty. So I cleaned it up, but I still had an awful lot of trouble getting it into the gearbox end because of just that excessive amount of surface rust. So there's lots of little things like that that you know, that would add up for the average person that, you know, did have a donor car or needed to go buy them. Again, to the gearbox mounts, the ones that were on the gearbox he supplied and the ones in the gearbox I was going to use of my own, both were pretty well knackered. So once again I scrounged around and found a couple. So if you were doing this, you know, without all these other spare parts, you could quite easily end up spending you know, a couple of grand, a couple of $1,000 by the time you did. So it really depends on whether you find one in as clean a nick as this one. Interruption number 2. I thought once again I would just, there was a couple of little things I forgot to mention in the other video, so I thought I would come back and chuck them in here, because one of the things that was just fairly important was, with all the parts that he supplied in the boot, the one thing I didn't notice was missing, and not that it really mattered too much for me, but it was missing the clutch plate itself. The pressure plate and the flywheel were in there, but not a clutch plate. So once again, if you didn't have a backyard full of spare parts that you could borrow bits and pieces from, you potentially would have to try and get your hands on either someone's old clutch plate, or dare I say it, even a new clutch kit, which would definitely, you know, set you back a few dollars. So just another little thought there as well. Also, the center section of the exhaust actually had a little hole in the muffler, so or well, not so much in the muffler, probably a resonator. So rather than get that repaired, I did swap that out for another one I had around here, because the center length was the same. So again, just another little additional thing that had to be done along the way. On top of that, although it's not really relevant to the actual gearbox swap, I did also get the roof lining and the seat repaired, just so that would obviously get it up to safety spec as well. The driver's seat was quite saggy, and the hood lining was, yeah, hanging way too far down to be, yeah, anything like legal. And the steering wheel as well, I did actually bang a little bit of silicone in the back of the steering wheel so that the top section of it wasn't loose. So that's, yeah, a few little extras I thought I'd throw in there for anyone who's actually watching, just so they know where we're at. As far as conversions goes, if you've got some spares up your sleeve, or you know of some, yep, have a crack. If you're not too mechanically skilled and you don't have a donor car, or your donor car's got bits missing, then yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. I'd wait until you see a nice rust-free one. It might cost you $2,500–4,000, but you'll save yourself, you know, a week's work and a lot of little extras. So hopefully that's helped you guys out with the decision. And yeah, enjoy whatever's to come on the vids.